Hello, beautiful genius, and welcome back to another episode. So I'm excited to talk to you today about making the mindset and the mental shift and the energetic shift and the emotional shift from preparing for worst case scenarios to preparing for the best case scenario. So if you're in that boat right now where you find yourself always preparing for what could go wrong, or maybe you're living in fear because you're hearing stories on the news and you're hearing people just say that the economy's bad and this and that is happening and oh my gosh in the future and there's a famine here and this is going to be happening and this burned down and all this stuff happened, right? And so you find yourself in your mind just preparing, especially us as mothers. We have a responsibility for our families, right? Some of us might be providers for our families, and even if we're not, we're in some way shape or form responsible for a provision for our family, right? So it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking like, "Oh my gosh, I have to think of, well, what if this happens and this and that, and I have to make sure I have to just be prepared for every possible bad thing that can happen." But what happens when we get into that pattern and when we get into that habit? First of all, you're not alone. So many of us have been in that position, right? And it's easy to fall even if you've gotten out of that boat, it's easy to fall back into it because of the crazy stuff that happens in our world, right? So in this episode, I'm going to share a few ideas to help you to shift out of that mentality if you are finding yourself in that. And then some things that you can some different ways of looking at the world, looking at yourself, looking at your situation, some tools that you can take away by the end of this episode that you can take away and start applying as soon as today, right? Because that's the whole point and the whole goal of this podcast is to give you applicable things that you could literally listen to the podcast, go apply it immediately after you stop listening to the podcast and start to shift into that transformation and that change that you're looking for. So, if you're finding yourself, or if you're in this boat, and life might look like this, right? If it's about your finances, you might find yourself thinking, maybe you got a bill in the mail, right? And maybe you're like, oh, okay, here's the bill. Maybe it's a little bit more than you expected or something like that. And you're like, okay, I don't really know how we're going to pay this. And then what happens? So, I want you to start the first thing. If you're taking notes, of course, I recommend that you do grab a pen, grab a paper, jot some of these things down that you can take away and hold with you. The first thing I want you to write down is, what are the patterns? What are my patterns of thinking? Start noticing your patterns of thinking that you get into when you find yourself in these situations. So, when a bill comes that you're not quite sure how you're going to cover, maybe you know how you'll cover it eventually, but you think in your mind, "Oh, I know I'm not going to be able to pay that on time," or something like that. Or if you have to take your kids somewhere, or you have to do a meeting, or whatever it is that you might do. If you need to commit to something and you have to get something done, but you're not really sure that you'll be able to do it on time, or that you'll be able to do it on the day that you need to do it, or you find when you are find yourself in moments of uncertainty, what is your mental pattern? How do you start to think? Do you immediately go for, oh, okay. Well, and I'll share with you how I used to think, right? So in my darkest times and in my times of like struggling financially and just really trying to figure out all this mindset stuff and get myself to a space where I could tap into abundance and tap into abundant thinking and abundant expectations, I found myself, getting a bill in the mail and then being like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this." And then immediately my mind would go into a spiral of, "Okay, well, maybe I can call and ask for an extension on this, or maybe I can do this, or I could sell this over here." And sometimes it can be creative, right? And I'll get into a small exercise that you can do to to address all these concerns from a creative place rather than fear, because it's all about the energy that we're doing things in. But what I was essentially doing was I was preparing myself for not being able to pay the bill that came in the mail, or I was preparing myself to not be able to keep the commitment that I made to X, Y, and Z, whatever thing that it was, right? So what is it that we're doing when we're preparing that, right? We're not just thinking it. We also might see a scenario in our mind. So I would also, maybe you can relate to this. I would also see myself having conversations with my partner, you know. Maybe you had a conversation in your mind with your spouse. Maybe you had an argument with them in your imagination. You're like, "Oh, well, yeah, okay, I'm going to tell him about this." And then, "Oh, yeah, we're going to start fighting about that, and he's going to say this." And maybe you just had a whole conversation and argument and blow up thing happen in your mind, which didn't even happen, right? But you're just like thinking, "Oh, this is what's going to happen because this is what always happens." And, couples always, the number one of the top causes of divorce is financial issues, right? And miscommunication issues and having issues in your finances is a huge issue within relationships and causes a lot of relationship problems, right? So maybe you maybe you could relate. And so I would picture that. I would be like, oh, okay, well, oh man, I'm gonna have to deal with this conversation, and we're gonna have an argument, and then this is gonna happen, and that, and I would just go on a spiral of like everything that could possibly happen, everything that could possibly go wrong, and how I would react to that. And I thought that by me doing that, and in the moment, I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing. But when I began to reflect and learn how to change myself, what I discovered was I was literally using my creative power in a destructive way, right? Because we don't realize that our imagination is a creative faculty, it's a force. It's something that is creative, just like the spark that created you in your mom's womb or created your child in your own womb, right? Our imagination, our expectation, our awareness, and our consciousness, those are all creative faculties, right? So if we're constantly sitting there expecting the worst thing to happen and planning for what we're going to do and coming up with like scenario A, B, C, D and E if it goes wrong, we're misusing our energy. We're literally investing energy, we're meditating on, we're dwelling in, we're pouring our creative juices and energy and resources into what might go wrong, right? And the universe just sitting there neutral, like, okay, there's a bunch of basically, it's like we're resonating this out into the universe of like not enough and lack and oh my gosh, and this might happen and worry and fear and all these things, right? And then so it can't help but to deliver that back to us. It's like, oh, okay, I see over here, Kimberly is wanting a scenario of lack, limitation, and dealing with dealing with issues of not being able to do what she wants to do. So I guess I have to deliver that experience to her. So like we don't realize in the moment that that's what we're doing, and that's the process that we're creating in our life, right? So if you've been experiencing patterns of things happening over and over again, like it's always like each and every month, like the same thing happens where I don't know how I'm going to pay this, I don't know how I'm going to pay that, or the same thing happens like you're trying to invest in yourself, but yet you really want to do it, and you tell yourself in your mind like, oh, okay, I know I want to do this. If I had the money in my bank right now, no problem, I would click the buy now button or whatever, and I would do it. But for some reason, like each month passes and like you just never have that extra amount, right? Or maybe whatever pattern it might be for you. So reflect on that. What are your thought patterns? What goes on in your head? What's that conversation look like and sound like? Are you using your visualization in a negative way? Are you visualizing yourself being stressed out and snapping at the kids and fighting with your spouse and all these things being caused by something going wrong and not going your way? Are you planning for plan B, C, D, and E and not in a good way? You're planning for all these things that could possibly go wrong? Are you using your creative and imaginative faculties incorrectly and literally creating scenarios that you don't want to experience, but you're creating it because why? Because that's where you're putting your energy and attention, right? So when we put our thoughts and our expectations and our worries and our fears, especially worry and fear, are such powerful magnetic forces. Worry and fear. Like if you're sitting there worried about something and you're sitting there and you're fearful, you as an electromagnetic being, you are literally just you're just magnetizing that event to you. And until you become aware of that, and until you understand, now you might not understand the science behind it, the physics behind it, and all that kind of stuff. But if you just open your mind to understanding that that's how this universe works, and you begin to understand that, oh my God, like if I'm in fear, literally I'm emitting a signal as the radio broadcast frequency being that I am, I'm emitting a signal of fear, doubt, worry, and it's going out into the universe. And guess what? My heart space, because it's contracted and it's feeling fear and worry, it is literally pulling the experience that can match that, because that's just the law. That's how it works. The law of attraction, the law of vibration, the law of cause and effect. We're governed by all these natural laws that we're not taught about in school. And when you start to learn about them, you can see in your life, you're like, oh, I can see how, like, oh my gosh, like my consciousness, my imagination, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, all of these things, they really are working together to create my reality. So reflecting on what are your thought patterns? How do you react? How do you respond? Now, here's a better way of doing it, right? So maybe you want to be that responsible mom. You want to be that responsible parent. You want to be that responsible provider for your children, your family, That's totally normal and natural, right? Me too. Like we want to be there. We want to feel like we're not just putting our head in the clouds and just expecting for, millions of dollars to fall into our lap. And we want to feel a lot of times when we get into this type of work, sometimes we feel irresponsible because we're dreaming so much, we're imagining so much, and we're picturing things. But if on the physical 3D realm, it's not really matching up yet because there's a time in between of it's like a initiation process is what I call it. There's a time in between where you set an intention of creating something and you start putting in the work and the action and the undoing all the crap and and letting go and releasing on all that kind of stuff. There's a time in between before you start to see your reality shifting, changing in a massive way to reflect your new vibration, right? So when we're in that period, it can feel like, oh, I'm being irresponsible, or sometimes like one of the beliefs that I used to hold was that if I didn't worry about my problems, I was being irresponsible. I felt that by worrying about my problems and worrying about issues and things like that, like I had to sit there and dwell on it because otherwise I'm not going to find a solution if I don't just sit there and worry and feel whatever way about it, right? But how logical is that really? Like how can you count the number of times that you've actually solved a problem by worrying about it and being fearful about it? Or in the past when you maybe had an issue that you weren't really sure, maybe you're trying to come up with a certain amount of money. Did your solution come from getting into more of a creative state and finding the solution and thinking, well, what could I sell or what can I create or what can I go out and do to create an exchange for money, or do you just sit there and worry about it and have negative thoughts and feelings and emotions about it and suddenly the solution came? What you'll find is that it's not until we shift out of that contracted, fearful, worry, doubt state and planning for the worst, and we start thinking about, wait a minute, no, what if this could go better than I imagine? What if this could actually turn out great? What if money could show up here and show up there? And what if I could do this? And what if I can do that in a positive manner? So, what you want to do is you want to get yourself, and this is going to take discipline and it's going to take training. Like all of this stuff, it's all literally just disciplining because how our brains work is we over time have created and trained ourselves to work on autopilot in the ways that we think and we react and we feel. Because if we literally had to think logically and consciously about every single thing that we were going to think, every single way we're going to feel and react or respond, if we had to consciously do that and our subconscious didn't take over a portion of that, a large portion of that, which it does, we just wouldn't be able to handle it, right? So our subconscious is there to help us, but what happens is we give it a bunch of programs that are crap and deliver crap to us and help us to create crap experiences, right? So we have to learn to replace it. We have to learn to create a new pattern and spiral of reacting to situations. So for example, right? Say you have a bill, like your electricity somehow is like doubled out of nowhere, just doubled, and maybe you're like, "Oh my god, like what the heck? This is crazy. How are we going to pay that?" Right? So asking the question isn't wrong. How are we going to pay that? If you're coming from the energy of, okay, how can we pay this? How can we pay this on time? What are some things we can do to come up with the funds to pay this thing on time or pay this in full or whatever question it might be? But to pay attention, number one, to the energy behind the questions that you're asking. Because if you're asking questions from fear or doubt or worry, or if you're asking questions from you really just have no idea, you have no faith, you're just, oh my gosh, it's just all happening to you, all raining down on you. Like the biggest decision you have to make in this work is you are not a victim. You're not. No matter how much you feel like you are, or no matter how bad it looks, or how helpless you might actually feel, you have to say and make the decision and declare in your life. Like you have to make the decision and declare, like put your foot down, and say, I'm not a victim of my circumstances. I'm just not. I'm choosing to be a creator of my circumstances. In the past, I chose to be a victim. In the past, I was being a victim and I didn't know it. In the past, I thought I didn't have any power. I was unaware. But the simple fact, number one, that you're here on this podcast, number two, that you're beginning to recognize that you are a powerful creator and that you do have creative energy within you and that you can create a life by design from the inside out. The fact that you just are aware of that and you're open to it and you're like learning how to do it, the simple fact that you're willing and aware to become aware of that truth is already starting to make shifts. Now, you might not be able to see it yet, but this takes, like I said, a discipline and consistency over a long period of time. Think about it. I'm about to turn 35. I don't know how old you are, right? But think about how many years you've lived in lack and limitation, or you've lived in a place of playing small, or you lived in a place of fear, or you lived in a place of doubt, worry, and anxiety, or you've lived in that probably most of your life, right? If you're anything like me, like I grew up in a state of fear, doubt, and worry always. My young adult years were fear, doubt, and worry, and just always stressed, right? Until I began to learn and to improve myself how to reprogram everything. It was a long time, right? So you have programs that are just deeply ingrained, deeply etched, that you have to shake loose. And you do it by creating new ways of thought, new ways of feeling, new ways of being, new ways of believing, right? You do it by doing these exercises, right? You do it by investing into yourself. You do it by hopping on these types of podcasts, and you do it by doing the journaling exercises, and you do it by reading the books or listening to the I was going to say the tapes, listening to the audios or whatever it is that you're doing. You do it over time, consistently, day after day after day after day. You have to be committed to being disciplined, and like I always say, you're becoming an athlete of the mind is what you're doing through your discipline and your consistency. So training yourself to create a new spiral of what's the best thing that can happen in this scenario. So here's what I'll share with you, my personal little formula that I do, right? So if I have something come in, something that in the past I would get worried about, I would be stressed about, I would immediately my just automatic reaction used to be, oh, okay, well, yeah, well, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to pay for this, so I'm gonna have to explain this to this person, I'm gonna say this to that, and I would just like have conversations and, like I said, arguments, and I would just have all these scenarios play out in my mind, right? So number one, I committed to stop doing that. Number two, I decided that the minute that my mind would just start to think like that, I would just I would interrupt, I would stop, I would literally, like, sometimes you have to say stop or nope. Maybe you have to talk to yourself a little bit, and that might feel weird to you, but I'm telling you right now, like, you are already talking to yourself inside. So sometimes if we hear ourselves speaking to ourselves from the outside as if we are talking to another person, it helps us. And I don't really know, science behind that and everything, but try it out, see if it works for you. But for me, it works for me. Like, if other people aren't around, a lot of times I'll just talk to myself about things, right? Out loud. Because that's just how I like what I like to do. But you have to interrupt that pattern somehow, right? So if it's through a clap or through, T. Harv Eker through the Millionaire Mind seminar, he has the attendees put a rubber band on their wrist, and he says every time you have a negative or limiting thought around money, you pull that sucker back and you let go of it and you snap yourself with the rubber band. So you're associating pain with the limiting thoughts. So if you want to go that far, put a rubber band on your wrist. And every time that you start to have that reaction, you're like, snap. And you're like, oh shit, like, ow, that hurt, But however you want to do it, but it has to be interrupted. And then the second step would be, after once you interrupt it, you say, nope, I'm not going to believe this way anymore because I'm choosing to believe the truth about myself, which is what? I'm a creator of my own reality. I am within me is the same force and creativity and intelligence that created the trees that I see right outside my window, or the grass that I have outside in my yard, and takes care of nature. And I have no idea how all of these things work, and I have no say, and I have no control over the seasons and the rain and all of these things, but somehow the intelligence just takes care of it, right? That same intelligence is within me and knows the answer to this problem. It knows the solution to this challenge that I'm looking at or that I'm facing right now. And I'm going to choose to tap into my own personal internal creativity to find the solution. Something like that, right? And what you're doing is you're just acknowledging the power within you. If it's a prayer, you want to pray to God, you want to pray to whoever, whatever. You're acknowledging the power that is within you, right? Individualized as you, that can operate through you to help you become the solution to the problem or the challenge, right? You're like a co-solver, co-creator, co-solver. You're the person that's going to help find the actual solution, right? You don't need someone to come and save you out of the solution. You're not a victim. You don't need somebody, you don't need anyone to come in and whisk you away from it or nothing like that. Like, you are so powerful that you could come up with the solution, or you could find the solution, or you can attract the solution, or you're going to cross paths with the solution if you choose the creative route, right? So that acknowledgement, so the awareness, the acknowledgement. And then what I do is I do three things. So I choose 3, or sometimes I'll do more. Sometimes I'll just go on like a rampage of like, okay, this could happen, that could happen, this could happen, but in a positive way, right? So where in the past I was like, oh, well, if I can't pay this, then that's going to happen. I'm going to have to do this and I have to juggle this over here and subtract that over there and then have this conversation, that conversation. Now I do it in a creative way, right? So that might look like you sitting down and maybe even want to write it out, or you can just do it in your head. However you learn the best, however it works for you is the best way to do it. There's no one way to do these types of things for every single person. It's whatever works for you, makes you feel confident in what it is that you're doing. For me, I like to write stuff down. So sometimes I'll take out my journal, I'll just be like, okay, the best thing that could come from this situation, and I'll just start writing down the best case scenario number 1, best case scenario number 2, best case scenario number 3. I'll go and just however many I'm inspired to write down, I'll just write down. Maybe it's if it's a certain amount of money that you need, then different ways of just using your imagination, just different ways that you could possibly get it. Maybe I can sell this, or if you're an entrepreneur, maybe this person could become a client, or that this thing, or I can create something new, or I can go out over here and facilitate this, or come up with a new idea, or just whatever it might be. The whole goal is tap into the shift from the fear, the doubt, the worry, and the planning for the worst case over into a creative state, because you want to align yourself with a creativity, like the frequency of creativity, where all possibilities are, where all potentials are, and where the solution to your problem is. Einstein has a quote, right? He says that the solution to or a problem can't be solved at the same level of consciousness that created it. What does that mean? That means we have to lift ourselves above the situation. We have to lift ourselves above the circumstance, above the problem. What does that mean? That means to rise our consciousness to and you could even, in NLP they teach these different modalities of like you can even like raise yourself and make yourself this huge giant like 1,000 feet tall, and your problem is like a little like 4-inch problem, and you're like looking down at it like okay, like, I'm gonna let you deter me. I'm gonna let you get me off track. I'm gonna let you put me into a state of fear, doubt, and worry. No, I don't think so. Like, there's different little mind tricks that you can do, right? But all of these things, what are they doing? They're helping to align your frequency and get you on that frequency of creativity so that you can pull in the solution. So let's do this. Let's say come up with 3 best case scenarios, right? And then just start making a list of like I said, if it's an amount of money that you need, write down all the different ideas of all the ways that you personally can think of at the moment, ways that you could come up with that money, whether it's you're doing something in exchange for the money, you're selling an item, you're creating a product and selling it, you're talking to someone about becoming a client of yours, or whatever it might be, working extra hours if you're in a job, or working some doing a side hustle or something, whatever it might be, right? You get it, right? Write down every single possible way that you can create the amount of money that you need. And then the whole point is get yourself in the habit of doing this. And it is very easy and simple. It's very simple to explain, right? And you're like, "Oh, that's it? Really?" Like just start thinking of what's the best that could happen and what are some things I can, but yes, because what you're doing is you're getting yourself out of the habit of sitting there, because when you're sitting there on the couch and you're just like, "Let me just turn on Netflix, let me just not do anything, let me get my mind off of it," but then your mind doesn't get off of it, right? You might be sitting there watching Netflix and then you're like find yourself in your mind and you're still thinking and worrying about, and then what's going to happen is you're satisfying your mind's desire for going after a solution. So it's like something in us, especially as parents and mothers too, like we're like, I have to feel like I'm being responsible about this, right? So you're switching that need, you're fulfilling that need because you're like, I did something. I did the journaling, right? I'm expecting the best case scenarios. I'm keeping my mind on that. I'm keeping my mind on what could go right. What are all the different things that I can think about that can go right? I'm actually seeing it in my mind. So that would be the third thing too, is make sure you're using your imagination for good and for a creative purpose, right? So maybe you used to imagine scenarios and hear yourself in conversations or arguments or whatever, like I explained. Start doing the opposite. Start imagining yourself telling your spouse, like, hey, I just found, an extra $500, or I sold this and we made an extra 1,000, or, you know what, I looked over here and I sold this piece of furniture we no longer need, made extra 200, or whatever it might be. See yourself having those conversations with other people in your family, whether it's your kids or whoever, see yourself having those positive conversations. See yourself being excited, see yourself checking the mail, and then, oh my gosh, there's some kind of refund or rebate on your insurance, or something showed up out of nowhere that you had no idea how it would come. But because you're on that frequency of expectation for the best and for abundance and for creativity, you're now tapped in where the universe is like, oh, yes, she's here. Now I can give her these things that I've been holding on to her. Because literally, this is like the metaphor that I picture in my mind. And I tell my clients all the time, like, imagine just this huge universal force, and it's got this huge like basket. Like, those things that hold bath toys, those nets that hold bath toys, right? It's like there's a net in the universe, and it's just got all the stuff piled that you've been asking for. For years, it's just got it all. It has everything, no matter what, how big or small, whatever it might be, whether it's money or something else or a material thing or just a situation or a relationship or whatever it might be, but it's got everything in that little, it's like a holding tank, or what do they call that in real estate? What's that term? It's on the tip of my tongue. Escrow account. It's like a universal escrow account. I think Abraham Hicks talks about that. But anyways, it's literally how it is though. It's all being held for you until you align yourself and just tap in to that frequency of more, of having more, of abundance. Or another great metaphor to think about it as is like, imagine a big house, right? Say like a 3,000 square foot house, and it's wired for electricity, right? And you walk in there and there's no furniture, no nothing, but there's one small little lamp, right? And the lamp has like a, say a 40 watt light bulb in it, right? And there's no lampshade on there. So you go and it's dark in there. So you go and you plug in the little lamp. And you plug in that lamp, and of course it's not dark in there anymore because you plugged in the lamp and it's wired for electricity, but it's barely light. Like there's light, but it's like you can't really see into the other rooms or the hallway or nothing like that. It's just light where you immediately are. Now, what would the logical thing to do be to light the house, right? You know that there's unlimited electricity. Like it's not like there's just one outlet. There's probably like 50 or 100 outlets in that house. It's a huge house. It's got outlets everywhere. Electricity can flow. I mean, you look outside, the power lines are up. There's nothing wrong with it. You know that it's working because the small little lamp is plugged into the wall, right? The only thing you have to change is the lamp that's plugged in to the source, right? The size of the bulb that is plugged into the lamp that's plugged into the source, right? Maybe up until this point, you've only been operating with a 40-watt capacity of your abundance or your prosperity or your love or your health and wellness and well-being or whatever it might be, whatever you're trying to create more of. You are that lamp, right? Your consciousness, your mind is the bulb, right? Your consciousness of whatever it is that you want to create is that bulb. All you have to do is create create expansion within yourself for more to flow in, create expansion in the area, and create an increase in awareness in the area and in consciousness in the area of what you want to achieve and experience more of. If it's love and relationships, and maybe you're single mother, single parent or something like that, but you really have been wanting to find that ideal person, figure out what are some ways that I can create expansion and a higher level of awareness in finding a partner. What would that look like? Making a list of what is this person, what would they be? What would they look like? How would they act? What would they do for a living? Or would they be in a business? Or what are all the personality attributes that they would have? There's countless success stories. I'm one of them of people who did that, and then the person showed up into their life. If it's wealth and finances, expanding your wealth consciousness, prosperity consciousness, abundance consciousness. There's so many ways to do that, right? But figure out who are some people. This internet and social media is amazing for helping us with this because we could literally connect with people instantly, quite literally, right? Go start browsing Pinterest. Go start looking, if it's like a bigger house that you want to move into, go start looking at those houses. Go to Zillow. Who cares? You don't have the money, you don't have the credit, whatever right now, that's all temporary circumstances that can change. Those are all temporary. Everything that you're experiencing is temporary. Nothing is permanent, right? It can all be changed. It can all be shifted. But you have to believe that. You have to believe your lack of whatever it is that you might be having is just temporary. You can't think that it's a life sentence. You can't think like, oh, this is just who I am. This is just God's will for me. This is just like, no. It's temporary and it can be changed. Everything can be changed. Actually, the only thing that truly exists is change. Everything is in change. That's it. Within the universal laws. Everything is constantly in motion, constantly changing, constantly shifting and evolving, right? Including you, including your life, including everything that you want to change, right? So expanded awareness, expanded consciousness. So let's recap really quick and then I'll let you go. So the three things that you're going to do differently. Number one, start to become aware of the way that you react when something arises that you would normally feel fear, doubt, and worry about. Notice the patterns that you get in. Stop yourself in the moment immediately. Stop. Create an interrupt. Whether you have to clap, whether you have to hit your hand, smack your hand, use a rubber band around your wrist, whatever you have to do. Create an interrupt and interrupt that pattern and say, no, I'm stopping this thought. I'm not thinking like this anymore. I'm recognizing, then recognize your power. I'm recognizing the power that's within me to create. I will find a solution to this problem, to this challenge, to this issue by tapping into my internal divine creativity that's literally unlimited and infinite within me. Doing whatever exercise works for you, whether it's going into a journal, writing down all the best case scenarios, just sitting there thinking about it to yourself, speaking it to yourself, being like, no, I'm ready for this to happen or this could possibly happen. Picturing yourself having healthy imaginations, visualizations, conversations, imagined conversations with others about the best thing happening, the money coming out of nowhere, the new opportunity opening up, whatever it might be. Make it up. Use your imagination. It doesn't matter. The whole idea is just to get yourself on that creative expectancy frequency where you can become available for it because the universe has it. It's ready to give it to you, right? So notice, choose that new pattern of reacting, choose that new pattern of visualizing, right? And pick at least three best case scenarios that can actually happen instead of the worst case ones. And then if it's like an amount of money that you're trying to come up with, write down all the different ways that you can think of that you can personally come up with the money, or ways that money can come to you unexpectedly, or the craziest way that money could come to you, or the most unexpected way that money could possibly surprise you, or just whatever it is. The more creative you can get with it, the better, because you're just raising your frequency through getting creative, right? And just knowing that by committing to this and by getting through this little waiting period of, it's like an incubation period, right? I called it the, what did I call it? What did I call it? What was that word? Anyways, it'll come back to me in a minute. Initiation, there we go. Initiation period of deciding to create something and then allowing the 3D reality to adjust in the easiest way possible to bring you what it is that you want to create, to bring you what it is that you want to experience. Hold on, I got it. My laptop keeps like going to sleep. There we go. Make sure it doesn't end. So choosing the new way of reacting and the best case scenarios instead of the worst case scenarios, right? And then in your mind, knowing and being aware within yourself that you are a creative center and a creative a force and a power is within you, right? That's just been dormant until now, and now it's been activated, right? You're on this podcast, you're aware of it. You've been listening to the other podcasts, or you've been in books and you've been listening to other audios and you're watching different stuff and you're becoming more aware, right? The power of awareness is so powerful, of you just recognizing these truths and just considering them and just thinking and becoming open to them is already changing things, right? But our mental actions and our emotional actions and our actual physical actions have to match up to that new awareness, because we could learn as many things as we could learn a lot, and we can know and understand something consciously, but until we get into the work of releasing what no longer serves us, rewiring our brain and our habit patterns of thought, rewiring, reprogramming the subconscious mind, doing all these things to to teach ourselves something new. You know, if you're not in the Pranamama breathwork portal yet, I highly encourage you to get in there, because we're learning how to do breathwork together. I'm putting modules in there just about every week to teach you what everything that I'm learning and everything that I'm using and experiencing in my life in regards to breath work. There's different modalities, you know, different types of meditations and different types. Just commit to the internal work more than maybe in the past you've committed to external, thinking that everything is just from the external, everything that you do, everything that you focus on doing so much. Shift it over to the being and watch how things start to transform for you. Watch how things start to actually change, because you're becoming someone first within and the external is changing for you, right? So I hope you took value from this podcast. As always, if you did, please feel free to share with someone that you love and care about. I believe in your infinite potential. I will see you, or you'll hear me, in the next episode. Bye.